Welcome back to A Slice of News, where I cut you off a slice of news. Vice President J.D. Vance has warned that as the government shutdown continues to drag on, deeper cuts to federal workers are ahead. During a recent interview with Fox News host Maria Bartiromo, he was quoted as saying, quote, "The longer it goes on, Maria, the more significant they're going to be," referring to cuts to federal workers. If you remember, we went 9 days before announcing insignificant layoffs. Again, the President of the United States wanted to reopen the government. He was trying to work with Democrats in order to make that happen, but the longer this goes on, the deeper the cuts are going to be. Unsurprisingly, Vice President Vance is pushing the narrative that the government shutdown is the Democrats' fault. If they had just given the Republicans what they wanted, the government wouldn't have to be shut down. And so, therefore, they're framing it as any cuts to federal workers that happen now because of the shutdown are the Democrats' fault, when, of course, that is far from the truth. Vice President Pence goes on to say, quote, "To be clear, some of these cuts are going to be painful. This is not a situation that we relish. This is not something that we're looking forward to. But the Democrats have dealt us a pretty difficult set of cards." This, of course, is yet more nonsense because they absolutely do relish this and they absolutely do enjoy cutting federal workers. These are the same people who ran on a platform of cutting government waste and eliminating irrelevant government positions. So the idea that they don't enjoy cutting further federal workers is completely non-believable, as is this idea that the Democrats dealt them a bad set of cards, when really all the Democrats wanted was to not let the Affordable Care Act subsidies expire as they will at the end of the year, forcing everyone's insurance premiums to go skyrocketing, but also to reverse some of the Medicaid cuts that the administration has already done. So this whole narrative that, oh, we don't want to have to cut these federal jobs, but the Democrats are making us, is complete nonsense and should be called out for the blatant lie that it is. I think the only thing that he said in those quotes that wasn't a complete fabrication is the fact that it will be painful. Over 4,000 federal workers are set to be fired as a result of the shutdown, according to a court filing made by the administration late last week. And that's not including the hundreds of thousands of federal workers that are currently furloughed, not knowing if they'll be the next on the chopping block. It seems very clear that the Republicans are using these threats of firings and mass layoffs as a sort of punishment for not capitulating to their whim, and the Democrats in Congress not simply giving in to them and stopping pushing against them to try to get an extension on the Affordable Care Act subsidies and to reverse the Medicaid cuts. Essentially, we'll keep cutting and causing as much pain as possible, make things as hard as possible for as long as possible, until you stop resisting and just give us what we want. Republican House Speaker Mike Johnson has said that he predicts that this government shutdown may become the longest in history, saying he will, quote, "not negotiate with Democrats until they hit pause on their healthcare demands and reopen." Their strategy really seeming to be to just run out the clock and wait it out until the Democrats can't hold out any longer and just capitulate, holding out on a reluctant participant until they are forced to turn their no into a yes just to make the abuse stop seems something right up their alley. Like any other abuser, their messaging is, why are you making us hurt you? If you just give us what we want, you wouldn't have to keep doing this. We don't want to have to hurt you, but you're forcing us to. When you think about it, us Republicans are the real victims. And while they're not actually saying that, of course, actually it is true. Republicans are going to be the victims here more than anyone else. Congressional Democrats fight to preserve the Affordable Care Act subsidies and to roll back these cuts of Medicaid aren't just to help Democrats, it's to help the entire nation. It's an established fact that red states are some of the most dependent on the Affordable Care Act and Medicaid, especially those living in rural areas. If the Democrats really did decide to give up the fight and just fold and give the Republicans what they want and stop the fight to preserve health care, a lot of those people in those red states will die. If the Affordable Care Act subsidies are allowed to expire and the premiums shoot up, a lot of these people will not be able to afford medical care. Full stop. 77% of Affordable Care Act marketplace enrollees are living in states that Donald Trump won during this past election and receive significant federal financial assistance in their medical expenses. The 4 states that use Affordable Care Act the most are Texas, Florida, Georgia, and North Carolina. Those are all Republican-led states. Louisiana, Kentucky, West Virginia, and Arkansas, all red states, all states in where more than a quarter of their population depend on Medicaid. If the Republicans in Congress get their way and the Democrats give up their push to keep Affordable Care Act subsidies from expiring, to reverse many of the Medicaid cuts, and to save the American people from huge jumps in their monthly health care premiums, it's not the people in those Democrats-owned states that are going to be hurting the most. I'd say I don't know what those red staters are going to do, but I do know what they're going to do. They're going to die because they can't afford health care anymore. Yet the messaging from them is still the Democrats should just give up and let the Republicans reopen the government because they need to stop holding us hostage. Honestly, I don't know why the Democrats don't jump on this and send out messaging to those red states and saying, hey, your elected officials are abandoning you. They want you to not be able to afford health care and to die. But we are fighting for you and your ability to pay for your health care and to live. Because, of course, in essence, that's exactly what they're doing. Congressional Democrats are not standing their ground on preserving health care purely for their own constituents. They're doing it for the benefit of everyone, red and blue, Democrat and Republican. It's to preserve everyone's ability to afford health care. Though, as red states are amongst the highest recipients both of Affordable Care Act and Medicare, so really the Democrats are fighting the most for them and not even their own blue states. And despite this fact, Republican supporters still want to call it the Schumer shutdown, the Democrat shutdown, and blame congressional Democrats for the government being shut down, even though they are really on the right side here. And maybe that is why they don't go full force in the messaging to red states and Republican supporters, that really they are the ones who are going to suffer and the Democrats are actually trying to help them. Because if they tried, those Republican supporters wouldn't listen anyway. Many conservatives live in a world where the Democrats are always the bad guys and the Republicans are always the good guys. So by default, if the Democrats want something, it must be wrong. Even if it is right, Democrats are bad and they will never accept help from them, even if they desperately need it. If Democrats in Congress really did say, you know what, fine, you guys want us to stop, we'll stop, and let the ACA subsidies lapse and let the Medicaid cuts remain. And now these poor rural Republican voters are paying $9,000 a month for health insurance, can't afford it, and are now dying. As a result, they would still say it's the Democrats' fault, even though they were literally fighting to prevent that from happening in the first place. For a lot of these diehard Republicans, they don't want the truth. They just want to be angry at Democrats. Trying to convince them of reality and facts seems pointless, so I can understand maybe why they are hesitant to even try. I think frustratingly, when this government shutdown does inevitably end with Democrats succeeding in preserving health care, they are unlikely to receive very much gratitude from those Republicans who they have helped in being able to afford basic health care and to not die. If Republicans in Congress get their way, many of which are the exact same representatives that these people voted for, they would be losing their hospitals. They would oftentimes have no hospital in their area once these cuts go into effect. They will lose health care just so rich people can get tax breaks. But they're so 100% on the Republican train that they will refuse to see the reality until it's too late. They would drive that train right off a cliff if it meant being able to deny Democrats what they asked for and not let the quote radical left get a win. They would literally rather die than admit that the Republicans were in the wrong and Democrats' fight to preserve the health care was the right thing to do. And yes, many are manipulated and misinformed by propaganda and don't understand what's going on. But once they've lost their Affordable Care Act, lost their Medicaid because congressional Democrats were not able to beat out their Republican adversaries, that's really not going to matter. There aren't going to be any do-overs. There are not going to be any, oh, well, I didn't realize, but now I see. the mistake. Once that happens, it's done. So I applaud the Democrats in Congress for holding the line and not backing down and waiting as long as it takes for them to come out of this shutdown victorious. I hope very much that Speaker Johnson is wrong and this is not the longest government shutdown ever. But as absolutely awful as this shutdown is, and as awful as it likely will continue to be as long as it goes, the consequences for ending it now and capitulating to the Republican demands is even worse. My hope is that this shutdown ends very soon and the Republicans are defeated as soon as possible. But until that happens, all we can collectively do is wait. That will be it for this episode of A Slice of News. I've been your host, Mr. Slice, and until next time when I cut you off another slice of news.
Yeah.